Brothers, imagine this. 1,000,000 Persian soldiers marching like a storm of bronze and death toward the narrowest pass in Greece. The ground trembles beneath their feet, the sea disappears under their ships, and on the burning rocks of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans prepare to write the most epic page in human history. Can you visualize the tension of that moment? Because what is about to happen is not just a battle. It is the moment when the gods decided to humiliate the man who believed he was their equal. I get goosebumps just thinking of Leonidas looking into the eyes of death and telling it, "Come and get us." Herodotus, the father of history, documented with mathematical precision this confrontation that forever changed the destiny of the West. We are not talking about exaggerated legends, but about historical records that come to us directly from the year 480 BC. Xerxes had assembled the most massive military force ever seen. Contemporary sources, such as the playwright Aeschylus, who himself fought at Salamis, confirm figures that range from 800,000 to over 1,000,000 Persian soldiers. The historian Diodorus Siculus and the Persian archives from Persepolis corroborate this unprecedented mobilization. Against this supernatural avalanche, the Spartan king Leonidas selected exactly 300 elite warriors, the Spartan Royal Guard, men who had trained since the age of 7 for this very moment. This was not a desperate suicide mission. It was a calculated strategy to provoke something that not even Leonidas himself could have imagined, the direct intervention of forces that were beyond human comprehension. The Spartans were about to unleash a chain of events that the ancients could only explain as the divine vengeance of the Olympian gods. To understand the magnitude of what is about to happen, we have to visualize the complete scene. It is August of 480 BC, and Xerxes, the King of Kings, has spent 4 years gathering the most devastating force the world had ever seen. The personal obsession of Xerxes was to avenge the humiliation his father, Darius, had suffered at Marathon 10 years prior. But this was no longer just war. This was a declaration of war against the gods themselves. Herodotus records the exact words of Xerxes as he contemplated his infinite army. "The gods have chosen me to rule all the earth under the sky." Can you believe this arrogance? A mortal directly challenging Zeus and Athena. His engineers had built pontoon bridges over the Hellespont, defying the laws of nature to connect Asia and Europe. They had dug a canal through Mount Athos to avoid the storms that had destroyed his father's fleet. Xerxes believed he had conquered nature itself. Now comes the first revelation that will send a chill down your spine. The Greeks did not choose Thermopylae out of desperation. They chose it because it was a sacred site, a place where the gods had sworn to protect those who defended justice. Leonidas did not just bring 300 warriors. He brought 300 men who had been purified in the temples of Sparta. They had offered their lives to the Olympian gods and marched toward death like priests marching toward an altar. This was not a military battle. It was a sacred ritual designed to invoke divine intervention. For 3 days that changed history forever, the impossible became reality on the burning rocks of Thermopylae. Persian military archives, deciphered in the 20th century, document the absolute perplexity of Xerxes' commanders. Their elite immortals, the invincible force that had never known defeat, began to fall like harvested wheat. Can you visualize this? Spartan spears piercing Persian armor as if it were paper. Their shields formed a wall of bronze that turned every Persian attack into a systematic butchery. But here is what historians call the phenomenon of Thermopylae. Persian eyewitnesses reported events that defied all rational explanation. The Persian chronicler Artapernes wrote of shadows, fighting alongside the Greeks when the sun went down, and of winds that changed direction to blind their archers. The Spartans themselves described moments of superhuman strength, as if the spirits of Achilles and Hector were fighting through their arms. For 72 hours, 300 men held off 1,000,000. The mathematics were completely broken. The betrayal of Ephialtes changed everything. When the Persians surrounded the Spartan position at dawn on the third day, Leonidas sent his allies away to save themselves. He and his 300 remained to fulfill their sacred pact. They fought until not a single one was left standing. But their sacrifice had activated something that neither Xerxes nor his Persian magicians could comprehend. And here is where the gods decided to intervene directly. A month after Thermopylae, while Xerxes was savoring his victory by burning Athens to the ground, the gods were preparing the most epic trap in history. Themistocles, the Athenian strategist, had conceived a plan so audacious that it could only work with divine help. His plan was to lure the entire Persian fleet into the narrow strait of Salamis, where their overwhelming numbers would become a crippling disadvantage. But he needed Xerxes to take the perfect bait. Then, something extraordinary happened. A slave of Themistocles managed to convince Xerxes that the Greeks were divided and planning to flee that very night. It was a lie so obvious that only blind arrogance could believe it. And Xerxes believed it completely. Persian chroniclers describe the king observing from the hills of Salamis, seated on his golden throne, waiting to witness the final annihilation of Greece. At dawn on September 20th, 480 BC, as the Persian fleet entered the strait like lambs to the slaughter, the impossible happened again. Aeschylus describes winds that appeared from nowhere, pushing the Greek triremes to supernatural speeds. Plutarch records apparitions of the heroes Ajax and Telamon fighting alongside the Athenian sailors. In just 6 hours of combat, the most powerful fleet in the world was reduced to floating timber and Persian corpses. Xerxes watched the disaster from the heights, seeing how the gods destroyed his invincible armada, ship by ship. The man who had believed himself a god had just discovered that the true gods do not tolerate blasphemy. The retreat was desperate and humiliating. The emperor who had arrived with 1,000,000 soldiers fled with barely a fraction of his army. But the gods' revenge was not yet finished. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, they decided to deliver the final blow to Xerxes' ambitions. Mardonius, the king's cousin, had been left in command of the remaining Persian forces with orders to complete the conquest. This was a grave error. On August 27, 479 BC, 100,000 Persians faced 60,000 Greeks led by the Spartan Pausanias, the nephew of Leonidas, and the gods unleashed their accumulated fury. Mardonius, the commander who had sworn to avenge Thermopylae, was crushed by a stone thrown by the Spartan Erimnestus in what witnesses described as the arm of Zeus himself guiding the act of vengeance. With the death of Mardonius, the Persian army completely disintegrated. But here is the most chilling revelation of all. On the very same day as the victory at Plataea, with no possible communication between the two theaters of war, the Greek fleet definitively destroyed the remains of the Persian navy at Mycale, 2 simultaneous victories hundreds of kilometers apart. The ancients called it divine synchronicity. Xerxes received the news in Sardis, where he had fled after Salamis. In a single day, he had completely lost both his army and his fleet. The man who had left Persia as a god returned as a broken mortal. Persian documents from the era record that Xerxes spent his final years obsessively building monuments, as if stones could erase the humiliation of having challenged the Olympian gods. In 465 BC, he was executed in the corridors of his own palace by Artabanus, his own commander of the guard. The divine revenge was complete. Can you believe the legacy that these 300 heroes left behind? Thermopylae became more than a battle. It transformed into the eternal symbol that freedom is worth more than life itself. Modern historians such as Victor Davis Hanson document how this resistance saved Western civilization. If Xerxes had conquered Greece, there would have been no Athenian democracy, no Greek philosophy, and no Renaissance to build the modern world. Whenever someone defends freedom against tyranny, they invoke the spirit of Thermopylae. Archaeologists have found Spartan spearheads mixed with Persian armor in the pass, physical evidence of that epic clash that changed history. But the most powerful legacy is a spiritual one. They demonstrated that there are things more important than staying alive. Plutarch wrote that the Spartans did not die at Thermopylae. They became immortal. Their sacrifice taught the world that true victory is not measured in numbers, but in the will to die for something greater than oneself. They proved something that the gods already knew, that true courage can defeat any tyranny, no matter how powerful it may seem. These 300 men provoked divine vengeance against the most powerful empire in the world, securing a future they would never see but whose principles we still cherish today.